At the hearing last week, there was this document R many 06, and Trudeau brought this up a lot, and he blamed Tucker Carlson and Jordan Peterson for spreading foreign Russian disinformation. I'm going to have this bot read it to you, and it's going to go through all the illustrations that they have as well, and then there'll be comments at the end. But he brought it up, and he seems to be bothering him a lot. So let's have a listen to this document, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Canada Wide. Let's have a listen.
Russia's role in the far-right truck convoy, an analysis of Russian state media activity related to the 2022 Freedom Convoy. Caroline Orbueno, University of Maryland. Abstract. Nearly a year after the start of Canada's 2022 Freedom Convoy, a series of protests and blockades that brought together a wide variety of far-right activists and extremists, as well as ordinary Canadians who found common ground with the aggrieved message of the organizers. The question of whether and to what degree foreign actors were involved remains largely unanswered. This paper attempts to answer some of those questions by providing a brief but targeted analysis of Russia's involvement in the Freedom Convoy via media and social media. The analysis examines Russian involvement in the convoy through the lenses of overt state media coverage, state-affiliated proxy websites, an overlap between Russian propaganda and convoy content on social media. The findings reveal that the Russian state media outlet RT covered the Freedom Convoy far more than any other international media outlet, suggesting strong interest in the far-right Canadian protest movement on the part of the Russian state. State-affiliated proxy websites and content on the messaging platform Telegram provide further evidence of Russia's strategic interest in the Freedom Convoy. Based on these findings, it is reasonable to infer that there was Russian involvement in the 2022 truck convoy, though the scope and impact remain to be determined. Introduction. 1 year after the start of Canada's 2022 Freedom Convoy, a series of protests and blockades that brought together a wide variety of far-right activists and extremists, as well as ordinary Canadians who found common ground with the aggrieved message of the organizers. The question of whether and to what degree foreign actors were involved remains largely unanswered. During a recent talk about disinformation for the 2022 CASAS West Coast Security Conference, I briefly presented a few slides of data on international media coverage of the convoy, including coverage by Russian state-funded media. The data I presented showed that Russian state media arm RT covered the convoy more than any other international media outlet, particularly during the crucial early weeks of the protest, which may have given RT an opportunity to influence the tone and framing of coverage for the duration of the convoy. These few slides of data were not the focus of my presentation, but the amount of engagement and discussion they generated suggests that there is still significant interest in trying to resolve the unanswered questions about foreign involvement in the truck convoy. This paper attempts to answer some of those questions by providing a brief but targeted analysis of Russia's involvement in the truck convoy via media and social media. Before looking at Russia's involvement in the far-right truck convoy, it's important to emphasize that this movement didn't appear out of thin air, nor was it shipped over from Russia. The organizers, tactics, networks, and ideology behind the 2022 Freedom Convoy are a direct outgrowth of the anti-lockdown protests, which themselves spawned from Canada's Yellow Vest movement and United We Roll convoy. Underneath all of these seemingly distinct movements is a rising tide of right-wing populism infused with a toxic blend of conspiracy theories, disinformation, grievances, and scapegoating that is now dominating political narratives and leading to increasingly inflammatory rhetoric that, at times, has spilled over into violence. The truck convoy, therefore, doesn't represent a new movement in Canada, but rather a new method drawing upon old grievances. However, as evidenced by examples such as Black Lives Matter in the US and the Yellow Vests in France, Russia views homegrown protest movements like this as an opportunity to exacerbate social divides and sow discord as part of its asymmetric assault on Western democracies. Acheves, 2019. Johnson, 2019. Russia's involvement in domestic protest movements around the world has included activities such as starting local activist groups, organizing rallies, coordinating funding, producing and amplifying media reports, creating deceptive social media personas, and more. Russian operatives often work both sides of divisive issues by providing support for protesters while also inciting violence against them, and by organizing dueling rallies. And there is ample evidence of Russia's involvement in far-right movements around the world. From the National Front in France to the Northern League in Italy to the inundation of democratic societies. Russia's activities have helped fuel a rising tide of far-right populism that has sparked mass protests and civil unrest surrounding issues like immigration, prison, 2019, and vaccines, and energized far-right extremist movements in Europe, North America, and elsewhere. Members of extremist groups such as Atomwaffen, the Base, and the Russian Imperial Movement, all of which are listed terrorist entities in Canada, have reportedly trained in Russia while carrying out attacks in the US and Canada. And Russian disinformation campaigns have been cited as a contributing factor in pandemic-related protests, extremist activity, and unrest. In this paper, I used the data from my 2022 CASIS West Coast Security Conference presentation as a starting point for a deeper dive into Russia's involvement in amplifying divisive and inflammatory narratives about the Freedom Convoy through on-air and online coverage. Trends in Russian state media coverage can provide a good indication of what events and issues Russia may be targeting and/or seeking to influence. Russian state propaganda arms like RT and Sputnik have been described as an instrument of the state used to meddle in the politics of other states, and as directed global messengers using the guise of conventional international media outlets to provide disinformation and propaganda support for the Kremlin's foreign policy objectives. By studying RT's coverage, we can get a better idea of what those objectives are and where Canada fits into them. To that end, this study employed Google Jigsaw's global database of events, language, and tone to analyze trends in convoy-related television coverage across 7 international media outlets, including RT, for the 3-month period from January 8, 2022, through April 8, 2022. Next, a mixed methods open source intelligence analysis was conducted to examine online convoy coverage, via RT.com. Russian state-affiliated proxy websites southfront.org and globalresearch.ca, and Russian-linked convoy channels on the messaging platform Telegram. The primary objective of the study was to assess potential Russian involvement in the Freedom Convoy by documenting the activity of state-backed media and state-affiliated proxy sources, as well as the spread of Russian propaganda through convoy-related Telegram channels. This article does not attempt to measure the impact of such coverage, but rather investigate Russia's strategic interest in the convoy and discuss this in the broader context of Russia's involvement in far-right protest movements around the world. RT's on-air coverage of the Freedom Convoy keyword searches for Freedom Convoy or Truck Convoy during the specified time period were performed using Delt's Television Explorer tool, which queries the Internet Archive's television news archive. The results of this search are presented in the charts below. The findings show that RT produced a higher volume of convoy-related television coverage than any other international news outlet, including Al Jazeera, BBC News, CNN, DW, Fox News, and MSNBC. Specifically, RT had nearly twice the raw volume and percentage of convoy-related coverage as all other outlets combined. Fox News had the second highest volume of coverage, but it didn't even reach half the volume of RT. The total volume of coverage is not particularly high, but the disproportionate focus on the convoy by RT is worth examining. Note: overall coverage volume, as measured by mentions of the keywords Freedom Convoy or Truck Convoy per 15-second interval of airtime, across 7 international media outlets from January 8, 2022 through April 8, 2022. RT had a higher raw volume and a higher percentage of convoy coverage than almost all other stations combined. Delt Project 2022. Viewing the timeline of coverage helps give additional context to the data. Of note, RT was the first of the 7 international outlets to refer to the convoy in on-air coverage. Coverage volume peaked on February 13, 2022, and by late February, had largely dropped off. At its peak, Freedom Convoy 2022 coverage made up just under 3.5% of total airtime on RT. This time period overlapped with the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So the fact that RT devoted significant airtime to a Canadian protest during this time underscores its importance as an issue of strategic interest for Russia. Importantly, RT's early dominance of convoy-related coverage could have provided a crucial opportunity for Russian state actors to influence and shape subsequent media reports to align with the Kremlin's broad goals of sowing discord and weakening Western democracies by amplifying extreme and/or divisive social movements. The timeline of coverage also reveals another notable trend involving RT and Fox News. Specifically, when RT's coverage starts to drop off, Fox News coverage picks up. Recent reports have documented a symbiotic relationship between the two networks, which may explain the pattern described here. Note: as measured by mentions of the keywords Freedom Convoy or Truck Convoy per 15-second interval of airtime, across 7 international media outlets from January 8, 2022 through April 8, 2022. Russian state media outlet RT is represented in orange. We can also derive insight into Russian state media's goals and tactics by looking at word clouds, which provide a visual representation of textual data in which the size of a word or phrase represents its frequency or importance. In this case, the word clouds below are a visual summary of transcripts from 3 months of television coverage across 7 international news networks, focusing only on 15-second clips during which the phrases Freedom Convoy or Truck Convoy were mentioned. As such, the word clouds provide insight into the topics, people, and sentiment associated with the key phrases Freedom Convoy and Truck Convoy. To get a more nuanced view of Russian state media's coverage of the Freedom Convoy movement, we can look at word clouds with RT included, excluded, and isolated. Notable themes that emerged from the word clouds include the prominent use of the keywords NATO and Ukraine by RT, which disappeared from the word cloud once RT's coverage was removed from the input. Similarly, the keyword Nazi did not appear in the word cloud without RT's coverage as input, but it does appear in the word cloud with RT's coverage included. RT's coverage showed a preference towards describing the Canadian protest as a freedom convoy, while the phrase truck convoy when used by RT appeared to be closely associated with coverage of military truck convoys in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russian state media and state-affiliated proxies in addition to amplifying convoy-related coverage on television. Russian state media also produced a significant amount of online content related to the convoy movement. A search for the key phrase Freedom Convoy on the site RT.com yielded more than 250 articles about the convoy in total, at least 100 of which were published by the Russian state-backed outlet between January and April 2022. The vast majority of these articles were supportive of the convoy and many were also critical of the Canadian government and/or specific Canadian government officials, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The top convoy-related topics covered by RT.com included police intervention, fundraisers, the Emergencies Act, cryptocurrency, and civil unrest. The tone of coverage, which emphasized clashes between protesters and police, framed the protesters as victims of an aggressive government, and amplified divisions along political/ideological lines was consistent with a style that one former RT reporter described as anything that causes chaos. In order to focus criticism on the Canadian government and, to a lesser extent, the global elite, RT featured first-hand accounts and interviews. and emphasized human interest stories about ordinary people supposedly harmed by Canada's COVID-19 restrictions and by the government's response to the truck convoy. RT also produced a significant amount of coverage about the various fundraisers organized for the convoy, framing the story as one in which the organizers were innocent victims whose money was stolen or redirected by the government and big banks. Freedom Convoy protesters were described by RT as demonized and said to have had their human rights violated. Repeated, prominent uses of specific labels and phrases e.g. Dictatorship to describe the Trudeau government. Crackdown to refer to arrests of convoy participants suggests that RT may have circulated internal guidance on terminology for convoy-related coverage, as it routinely does for its international coverage. Of note, RT also sent correspondents to the scene of the convoy and, on numerous instances, featured interviews with convoy participants and organizers. As a result, RT's coverage was shared widely on social media by Canadian supporters of the convoy. This strategy of connecting with domestic influencers to encourage them to share foreign propaganda is one that has been used successfully by China in recent years. But its use by Russian state actors has not been explored as extensively. Freedom Convoy coverage on Russian state-affiliated proxy websites in addition to overt propaganda arms like RT. Russia also employs proxy sources to disseminate propaganda and other content while maintaining a degree of plausible deniability. These proxy websites and organizations occupy an intermediate role between the pillars of the ecosystem with clear links to Russia and those that are meant to be fully deniable. According to the U.S. Department of State, the use of proxy sources creates the appearance of independence and manufactures false consensus by making it appear as though the content is coming from multiple, independent sources. Proxy websites may also be used to disseminate tailored content targeting specific audiences, and to localize the Kremlin's narratives by crafting them around specific events, communities, and grievances. Two of the primary proxy sites used by Russia to disseminate propaganda to English-speaking audiences are Southfront and Global Research. As described by the U.S. Department of State, Southfront combines Kremlin talking points with detailed knowledge of military systems and ongoing conflicts and attempts to appeal to military enthusiasts, veterans, and conspiracy theorists, all while going to great lengths to hide its connections to Russia. The Crimean-based website frequently publishes coveted disinformation and conspiracy theories, and often republishes articles written by authors with advanced academic degrees in order to boost the credibility of the content. Global Research is the website of the Center for Research on Globalization, a Canadian organization that promotes alternative and fringe viewpoints about everything from vaccines to weather control. It plays an important role in Russia's disinformation ecosystem by providing a Western voice that can be used to spread and popularize misleading narratives aimed at delegitimizing Western governments and institutions, despite denying its ties to the Russian government. A 2019 report by Stanford's Internet Observatory found that the website has published or republished at least 7 authors who were discovered to be false online personas created by the main Directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, also known as the GRU. In total, these 7 GRU authors published more than 108 articles that appear on Global Research. A keyword search of the two websites revealed that both Southfront and Global Research published ongoing coverage of the Freedom Convoy that often included disinformation and inflammatory rhetoric, as well as repeated calls for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to step down. Global Research produced much more extensive coverage, but Southfront's coverage was much more inflammatory and conspiratorial. Echoing RT, Southfront claimed that protesters were being demonized and abused by the media and the government, and accused the Trudeau government of ordering the use of violence against demonstrators. Southfront also invoked what it called CIA color revolutions in an attempt to highlight perceived hypocrisy in the way the Freedom Convoy protesters were portrayed in the media. compared to the way CIA-engineered regime change operations were celebrated. Several articles used tactics such as appeals to authority, a logical fallacy in which a claim is said to be true based on the authority of the person making it, Goffredo et al. 2022, while others made sweeping, unfounded claims about the COVID vaccine being a killer. In comparison, coverage by Global Research focused more on portraying the protesters as victims being unjustly punished by the Trudeau government and unfairly criticized by the media. The most prominent theme in articles published by Global Research was the depiction of COVID mandates as authoritarian measures being used to control and oppress the population. Both Southfront and Global Research also made unfounded claims about agent provocateurs sent in by the Trudeau government to incite violence, a common trope deployed by Russia as part of its active measures campaigns. The two proxy sites also republished each other's content, as well as articles from other Russian proxy sites. Demonstrating the tightly connected and coordinated nature of Russia's disinformation ecosystem, e-freedom convoy channels effectively became repositories for pro-Russia propaganda, including several that are now posting Kremlin press releases and videos in Russian language. Channels such as Freedom Convoy, Convoy to Ottawa 2022 and the Global Freedom Convoy, 851 members, all regularly post pro-Kremlin content and share messages from explicitly pro-Russia channels. In the Global Freedom Convoy channel, a search for the keyword Russia returns 1,206 results. In the Convoy to Ottawa channel, the same search returns 921 results. And in the channel Freedom Convoy, the search returns 225 results. Some of these channels still post convoy-related content, too, including plans for upcoming events and rallies. While others have pivoted away from the convoy entirely and now only post a mix of Russian propaganda, QAnon conspiracy theories, and other conspiratorial content. Many of the conspiracy theories posted in these channels either originated from or circulated widely in Russian propaganda networks, including allegations that COVID-19 is a bioweapon and or that Russia invaded Ukraine to shut down U.S. backed biolabs, claims that Russian interference in the 2016 election was a hoax, and various conspiratorial narratives about COVID vaccines, 5G technology, and tracking chips. Some of the most widely shared content on these channels included narratives portraying the Canadian government as being overrun with Nazis and claiming that the Canadian government supports Nazis in Ukraine. These narratives align with some of the most dominant propaganda narratives used by Russia to justify its invasion of Ukraine. Other posts fused multiple Russian conspiracy theories together, such as one post in an Ottawa convoy channel that claimed Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was not shot down by Russia, but rather by Freemasons who targeted the airplane because there was a world-renowned AIDS researcher on board who was preparing to tell the world that AIDS was a man-made virus created by Dr. Anthony Fauci, the former director of the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease and former chief medical advisor to the president who served on the White House Coronavirus Task Force. Another thematic pattern observed in these channels was the posting of conspiratorial content promoting beliefs about being replaced. This, including mass posting and harassment of dissidents. Conclusions. The data presented in this article reveals a demonstrable strategic interest in the truck convoy on the part of Russian state-backed media outlet RT, as evidenced by the total volume of coverage on television and online. RT is among the most forward-facing parts of Russia's multifaceted disinformation and propaganda ecosystem, and thus serves as a relatively reliable indicator of Russian state interests and priorities. The confluence between RT's coverage and the Russian government's foreign policy interests has been thoroughly documented, as has RT's participation in disinformation and propaganda campaigns stemming from Russian intelligence agencies. These campaigns typically involve an assembly line of actors and organizations through which information and narratives are transmitted, shaped, manipulated, and laundered. As such, it is reasonable to infer that RT's extensive coverage of the convoy may be just the most visible sign of a broader influence campaign encompassing other actors and activities including proxy sources, cyber operations, social media accounts/engagement, and involvement in activism/organizing. This is an area that should be explored further in future research, as the current article's scope was limited primarily to content directly and overtly linked to Russian state media. In addition to RT's coverage, this analysis also documented sustained interest in the Freedom Convoy on the part of Russian state-affiliated proxy sites Southfront and Global Research. These two sources showed significant alignment with state media in terms of coverage timelines, thematic patterns, terminology, and language, and on conspiratorial/disinformation content. Both websites have been identified by the U.S. Department of State as proxy sources that have distinct roles in Russia's propaganda and disinformation ecosystem, occupying a space between sources that are overtly linked to Russia, like RT, and those that are meant to be entirely covered and deniable. These sources are generally perceived as more credible than Russian state media outlets, and often purposely publish content produced by experts and individuals with specialized degrees and/or titles in order to bolster the appearance of being independent and authoritative sources of information. There is a significant degree of cross-posting within the web of proxy sites and extending to other Russian state-backed sources. And several state-affiliated proxy sites have a history of publishing articles written by false personas created by Russian intelligence agencies. Importantly, state-affiliated proxy sites also tend to reach broader audiences. In the assembly line of Russian propaganda and disinformation, proxy sites are one step further down the line than overt state-funded media. And their primary function is to help diffuse Russian narratives into the broader information environment. As such, tracking the narratives as they move from state-funded media to proxy sources to social media and into mainstream information spaces is an important task for future research that could help us recognize coordinated Russian disinformation and influence operations, and also allow us to identify websites, social media accounts, and other sources that may be wittingly or unwittingly taking part in such operations. Through the use of basic OSINT techniques, this analysis also found significant and meaningful crossover between Russian propaganda and convoy-related content on the messaging platform Telegram. A number of Telegram channels that initially shared news and information related to the convoy later became repositories for Russian propaganda, including content from RT and Russian government websites. Much of this content was related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the vast majority were sympathetic towards Russia and hostile towards Ukraine. Other popular content spread on these channels included allegations that Western media outlets are biased and engaged in a cover-up, and that the Canadian government is using the pandemic to push tyrannical laws and policies. In one Ottawa Convoy Telegram channel, for example, a search for the word tyrannical returned more than 200 posts focusing on vaccine mandates, gun laws, legislation banning hate speech, and more. Often, convoy-related content and Russian propaganda were posted at the same time in these channels, suggesting at least that the same operator were posting both types of content. The origins and ownership of these channels are unclear, but it should be noted that Telegram plays a critical role in Russia's information and disinformation spaces. And previous Russia-linked influence operations have used methods and tactics that are similar to those described here. Additionally, Telegram has been widely used by far-right activists, in part because of its lack of content moderation, as well as its design features, which allow for full anonymity, end-to-end encryption, and both private and public messaging. It has also emerged as an increasingly important refuge for far-right activists, disinformation actors, and others who have been banned from major social media platforms. including in Canada. In terms of its function, Telegram serves as a gathering place where networks are built, links are shared, and messaging is coordinated, often with the goal of increasing the reach of content on other platforms. As such, content areas where different groups overlap, for example, canon-related content and biolab conspiracy theories, play an important role, as they introduce users to other seemingly like-minded groups. In this case, conspiratorial content served as an important area of overlap between convoy supporters and pro-Russia accounts. Future research should explore whether this area of overlap served as a conduit for foreign influence. As stated previously, the 2022 Freedom Convoy originated as a domestic movement, and the vast majority of its participants and supporters were Canadian citizens. However, coverage of the convoy and therefore, its prominence on the global stage was amplified by foreign actors, including Russian state media. It is unlikely that this coverage had a meaningful direct impact on the convoy movement, but rather may have influenced supporters and participants through more subtle and indirect pathways, including through social media platforms like Telegram. RT and other Russian state media outlets have been an important part of several recent global protest movements, including the Yellow Vest movement in Europe, Gerard et 2020, and far-right movements in Germany, as well as Black Lives Matter demonstrations and far-right rallies in the US. RT claims to present an alternative view to Western audiences, which may be strategically attractive to far-right audiences who share a similar worldview characterized by conspiratorial beliefs, distrust of the media and government, and resentment towards globalists and elites. Research suggests that far-right communities may utilize RT in unconventional ways, such as by using the comment sections to bring up far-right views by localizing the international content to domestic agendas and concerns. These dynamics could help to explain the significant degree of overlap between Russian state propaganda and truck convoy-related content and should be explored further. Limitations. This study focused primarily on overt Russian propaganda, which is only one part of a vast disinformation ecosystem that also includes a variety of more subtle activities and covert tactics. Therefore, the findings presented in this paper should not be interpreted as representing a comprehensive analysis of Russian activities surrounding the Freedom Convoy. Additionally, the keyword-based approach used in searches of television coverage, websites, and social media may have missed relevant activity and content that did not use any of the specified keywords or phrases. Furthermore, non-English language content was largely excluded from this analysis. Another limitation of this analysis is that it did not seek to estimate the reach or impact of Russia's activities. Therefore, it is unclear how many people were actually reached by RT's coverage of the convoy. RT's own estimates of its viewership numbers are known to be exaggerated, and the share of the population that sees RT each month varies widely by country. However, as the Nieman Lab put it in a 2022 report, RT doesn't need a huge audience to be influential, only the right one. Furthermore, as stated above, RT should not be viewed as an isolated entity, but rather as one part of a complex disinformation ecosystem with roots that trace back to the Russian government and intelligence agencies. The data presented in this paper, therefore, are presented as a starting point for further investigation looking at the reach and impact of Russian state media's coverage of the convoy. Finally, since this analysis used OSINT techniques to analyze publicly available information and social media data, it would not be appropriate to make any inferences about whether or not the social media channels and accounts included in the analysis are witting participants in a Russian disinformation or influence campaign, nor would it be appropriate to infer that the organizers of the Freedom Convoy knowingly worked with Russia or accepted Russia's support for their movement. This analysis focused on unidirectional influence and did not attempt to make any determinations about intentional coordination between Russia and other actors. nor did it explore the individual accounts posting in public Telegram channels. Future directions. The far-right freedom convoy that took place last year in Canada was part of a global trend of pandemic populism fueled by a combination of legitimate fears and anxiety, long-standing grievances, anti-government sentiment, and reactionary responses to rapid social change, among other things. The underlying causes of the movement that became the Freedom Convoy have long existed in Canada. But the circumstances of the pandemic proved to be fertile ground for the growth of a new protest movement that cultivated and exploited backlash to pandemic restrictions and mandates. While the Freedom Convoy emerged as a domestic movement, there remain questions about the extent of foreign involvement in various aspects of the protests. This paper represents a first attempt to answer some of those questions by examining Russian state media and propaganda activity surrounding the Freedom Convoy. Using a media monitoring tool and OSINT techniques, this analysis documented a persistent strategic interest in Canada's far-right Freedom Convoy movement on the part of the Russian state. As evidenced by Russian state-backed media coverage, state-affiliated proxy websites, and the use of the messaging platform Telegram as a shared information space for Russian propaganda and pro-convoy content. Although the data presented in this paper do not address reach or impact, they do offer some of the first verifiable answers to lingering questions about Russia's involvement in the convoy movement. And they represent an important starting point for further investigation. Future studies should build on these findings by exploring several new directions of related research. As noted in this paper, the timeline of Russian state media coverage appeared to potentially interact with Fox News coverage of the convoy, but that was outside the scope of the current analysis. A more in-depth investigation of the amount and type of coverage produced by different international media outlets could yield important insight into the spread of certain narratives, including foreign disinformation narratives. This could also help answer questions about whether Russian state media's early and dominant coverage of the convoy influenced subsequent coverage by other international news networks. Another promising line of study may be found in the analysis of visual imagery used by Russian state media, state-affiliated proxy websites, and associated social media accounts. The current study focused almost exclusively on text, with no formal analysis of accompanying visual imagery or memes. However, Russian disinformation campaigns often feature sensationalist imagery and memes designed to go viral, suggesting that images may be used just as strategically as text. As such, image-based analysis could yield insights that cannot be accessed via textual analysis. Additionally, themes and patterns found in images and their metadata could provide an opportunity for researchers to identify and track Russian disinformation content without relying on keywords or text-based approaches. Recent research indicates that important evidence can be extracted from images used in Russian disinformation and influence campaigns, including details that can help identify and link websites and accounts that are being used in such campaigns. Targeted analysis of visual content can also play an important role in the detection of disinformation, particularly when analyzing far-right political content, Faulkner et al. 2021. There is also a need for additional research exploring the role of Telegram as a conduit for Russian propaganda and, more generally, conspiracy theories, disinformation, and extremism. Longitudinal research tracking the life cycles of Telegram channels would be particularly useful given that channels with large audiences are often renamed, repurposed, and reused for different purposes in different disinformation campaigns. Much of this can be traced back to QAnon, which established a disinformation infrastructure that is still in use today and continues to be successfully replicated for new disinformation campaigns and protest movements across the world. Kim and Kim, 2022. While it is already well known that the Russian government uses Telegram and has urged the public to use the messaging platform to find pro-Kremlin content, It is not yet known whether and to what extent Russian operatives are utilizing the infrastructure built by QAnon. Exploring Russia's use of Telegram on a more granular level could reveal novel findings about how Russia has adapted its disinformation campaigns and tactics in the aftermath of widespread deplatforming in 2022. Gaining a better understanding of the evolving nature of Russia's information warfare strategy, including its relation to counter-disinformation efforts, its platform-specific adaptations, and its role in promoting extremist content is necessary to inform the development of the technical, social, and cognitive defenses that are needed to guard against it.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. You ready for another deep dive? Today we're digging into something you guys requested, Russia and the Freedom Convoy back in 2022.
Oh, well, this is an interesting one.
Yeah, it's a big one for sure. We've got academic papers, news articles, even some social media stuff to wade through. So, full disclosure, we're not here to relitigate the entire convoy itself, all the ins and outs of that. What we are looking at is whether or not the Kremlin, Russia, had any interest in it. Like, strategically, did they see this as an opportunity?
Right. And if so, how'd they engage, if at all? Right. We've got to be careful. Nuance is key here.
Absolutely. So was this just a Canadian protest that kind of, caught the world's attention for a while? Or is there something, I don't know, a little more, let's say, coordinated going on?
Well, it's certainly worth exploring. I mean, Russia does have a history of trying to, shall we say, amplify existing divisions, especially in Western democracies.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely part of the playbook.
Right. So a protest movement, big public global attention, I mean.
It's fertile ground. Exactly. Yeah. And if we want to see where someone's interest really lies, we often look at their media coverage, don't we?
Yeah, makes sense. What are they choosing to focus on?
And how much are they focusing on it, right?
Right.
So in this case, RT, formerly Russia Today, they went hard on the Freedom Convoy story.
Really?
Yeah.
Like more so than other outlets covering it?
Oh, yeah. Way more airtime, especially right at the start, those first couple of weeks when it was really blowing up.
So they're paying attention right from the get-go.
Absolutely. And it's not just the how much, but the how.
Yeah.
Like the actual angle they took.
Okay, so let's break that down. What was the narrative coming out of RT?
Well, they were really hammering home these stories of, everyday people just trying to live their lives, and they were being negatively impacted by all the COVID restrictions.
Right.
Painting the convoy organizers as kind of victims,
Oh, interesting. Victims of government overreach, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were the brave ones standing up to, well, their words, a tyrannical government.
Whoa, tyrannical government. That's a strong word choice there.
It is. And it doesn't stop there. Crackdown, dictatorship. They even started comparing Canada to, like, authoritarian regimes.
Yeah.
Implying that, oh, this is how it starts. Next comes totalitarianism. That whole bit.
So they were really trying to paint a picture of Canada as some sort of, like, oppressive state.
Exact. And that, my friend, is a very deliberate tactic. You make Western governments look unstable, untrustworthy, out of touch with the needs of their own people.
Yeah, it's all about sowing those seeds of discontent.
Precisely. You weaken those democracies from within.
Insidious.
It really is. And here's the kicker. This is all just, scratching the surface.
Oh, there's more. Now I'm really intrigued.
Yeah, we got to go deeper. Remember those proxy websites we talked about?
Right. The ones with, like, less obvious ties to the Kremlin. Less official, but still.
Exactly. Plausible deniability, right? And our research found, a couple in particular, Southfront and Global Research, they were really pumping out the content about the Freedom Convoy.
Okay, so similar message to RT, or were they going in a different direction?
Similar tune, but different instruments maybe. Like RT was sticking with that, I don't know, traditional news format.
Right, trying to look all, official and whatnot.
Exactly. But these other sites, they were free to get a little more freewheeling,
Yeah.
more inflammatory, even straight-up conspiracy theory sometimes.
Okay, now you've got to give me some examples. What kind of stuff are we talking?
Oh, the classics. The Canadian government being controlled by these shadowy global elites, and the protests were just like a convenient excuse to crack down on dissent, move towards a totalitarian state.
Right. And of course, the CIA is probably involved somehow, too.
Oh, absolutely. Couldn't leave out the CIA. They were pushing this narrative that the whole Freedom Convoy was actually like a color revolution orchestrated by, you guessed it, the CIA.
Oh, wow. So, like, full-on conspiracy land at that point. Did they have any evidence to back this up, or was it mostly just, conjecture?
Evidence. Nah, not really their style. Lots of innuendo, some cherry-picked facts, twisting things to fit the narrative. You know how it goes.
Oh, yeah, unfortunately. It's not about presenting, like, a balanced view or anything, is it?
Nope. The goal's not to inform, it's to persuade. Tap into that existing distrust people have. Offer up a simple explanation for something that's really complicated.
And that's, well, sadly, that's pretty effective a lot of the time, isn't it?
It is. We're all looking for explanations, right? Especially when things feel chaotic, uncertain. And if someone's offering an answer that confirms what you already kind of suspect.
Yeah, it's easy to get pulled in.
Exactly. And that plays right into Russia's hands, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You inject these narratives into the mix, create confusion, sow that discord, and ultimately, what are you doing?
Undermining trust in institutions, in governments, in each other.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. We've got to talk about Telegram.
Okay, yeah, Telegram. That's become a pretty popular platform, especially for folks who are, let's say, skeptical of the mainstream.
Yeah. And during the Freedom Convoy, Telegram was, well, let's just say it was buzzing. Researchers found a ton of public channels all about the convoy. And a lot of them, they were either openly pro-Russia or started sharing pro-Kremlin content as things went on.
So are we talking like Russian agents setting up these channels or more just, people with those beliefs finding each other?
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It's probably a mix, right? Some are definitely going to be coordinated. Others might just naturally gravitate that way. Hard to say for sure.
So you've got RT pushing this narrative, then these less official websites throwing fuel on the fire, and then Telegram becomes this like echo chamber for it all to bounce around in.
Quite the recipe, isn't it?
It is. And you start to wonder, how much of this is coincidence and how much is, well,
Deliberate? Intentional?
yeah.
Right.
You don't have to like invent the whole thing from scratch, do you? Just find a crack that already exists.
Wedge it open.
Right. It's like, okay, there's these tensions already. This event happens, and it's like someone's there with a loudspeaker just amplifying it all.
Exactly. And that's what's so, I don't know, unsettling about it, right? They don't have to create the problem. They just have to exploit it. Which leads to, I think, a really important question. What do we do about this?
Yeah, that's the big one, isn't it? Like, knowing all of this, how do we protect ourselves from, I don't know, getting played?
Well, I think it starts with information literacy. And I know that gets thrown around a lot. But
Oh, yeah.
But it's more than just like check your sources,
Mhm.
It's about being an active participant in what you're consuming.
So don't just like read the headline and assume that's the whole story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think back to those proxy websites. They worked because they were tapping into something real. Those fears, frustrations, people are looking for answers, right?
So we have to be aware of our own biases too, what we're predisposed to believe, even if it's not, the full picture.
Absolutely. And I know it sounds kind of obvious, but check your sources. Like really check them, especially if it's something that gets you riled up,
Because if it's too good to be true.
It probably is. Or if it's confirming what you already suspect, that's when you got to be extra careful.
Yeah, get out of the echo chamber, look for different perspectives, even, and maybe especially, if you don't agree with them at first.
Exactly. And watch out for stuff that's designed to make you, I don't know, angry, afraid. Because when we're emotional, we don't always think as clearly.
Right. We make those, oh, I should have thought about that for a second, decisions.
Exactly. And it's not just about, buying the wrong thing online. This is about how we understand the world.
And ultimately how we act in the world, right? Based on that understanding.
Exactly. So I think having these conversations, shining a light on these tactics, it's a good first step.
Yeah. It's like, what's the saying? Forewarned is forearmed.
There you go.
Yeah.
Like if pickpockets are common in a certain area, you're going to be a little more careful with your wallet.
Right. You're not going to just like leave it hanging out of your back pocket.
Exactly. Awareness makes a difference.
It really does. Well, this has been, I'm not going to lie, a little bit of a wild ride. Definitely eye-opening.
That's what we aim for.
But on that note, I think we'll wrap things up here.
Always more to uncover, though, right?
Always. For everyone listening, next time you see a headline about, I don't know, protests, government responses, anything like that, remember what we talked about today. Who's doing the talking? What might their goal be?
Ask the tough questions.
Exactly. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us, and a huge thank you to our expert for, well, being the expert. Until next time.